Hello everyone, this is Wade from High Tech Legion, and what we're looking at here is the BIOS for the UEFI BIOS for the MSI Z77A-G45 Gaming motherboard. It is Click BIOS II, and we've got three buttons here for Eco mode, Standard mode, and OC Genie II mode, which is their overclocking mode that allows it to automatically overclock the hardware in the system so that you don't have to mess around with any of the settings if you're not experienced with overclocking itself. On the front page here you can see we've got a nice heads-up display for the CPU temperature as well as the motherboard temperature. Our time, date, and the version of our BIOS is all right here, as well as the critical information about the system that we're running right here with the CPU, the frequency, and the DRAM frequency and memory size. Right here we have our boot device priority, which for Windows 8 should be set to the Windows Boot Manager. For any other operating system you would set it to specifically the drive that you have your operating system on. And under UEFI mode it shows a little U next to the icon here to indicate that that's a UEFI boot. Under our settings we have system status, which just gives you the pertinent information on the system, and you can set the date and time in here if it's not correct. And under advanced we have our PCI subsystem, which allows you to set the PCI Express mode. Defaults to auto, which most people, that's what you're going to want to leave it at. Your ACPI standby state and settings for sleep mode and the power LED mode. Integrated peripherals, where you can enable or disable the onboard LAN as well as change some other network information. These you should be able to leave the same because Windows usually handles this by itself. Under SATA configuration you have your SATA mode, which is defaulted to AHCI, which makes sense since many people are using SSDs now, and that's the optimal mode for those. And you can set any of the ports on the system to be hot pluggable. If you have, say, a dock on your case or something like that you want to be able to remove drives from. You can disable or enable your HD audio controller, and you also have the high performance timing configuration here, which is enabled by default. For integrated graphics configuration you have the PCI Express graphics or the integrated graphics to be the default, and the integrated graphics default monitor, multi-monitor, that's if you set this to enabled you can use more than one of the ports on the back of the motherboard for the monitors. Intel Rapid Start technology, if this is disabled it will go a little slower through the BIOS, but you may want to leave it disabled, the default, because if it goes by too fast you won't be able to get back into the BIOS without resetting it. Under USB configuration you can enable or disable the USB controller, and it also tells us what we have plugged in to the USB ports itself, and also turn on or off legacy USB support. The Super I/O configuration is for the COM port, that connector that is on the motherboard. And under hardware monitor you have your smart fan target and your system fan controls, and it also gives you a bit of your health status with the temperatures and RPM of the fans that are plugged into the system board. Intel Smart Connect technology and your power management setup to enable it to turn back on after you have a power loss, and this does default to power off, and that's what most people are going to want to leave it on. But if you're using your system as a server for some reason you can set that to boot back up after a power loss. specific Windows 8 features. Fast boot. Again, these fast boots are going to allow the system to boot up quicker, but it may lock you out of getting into the BIOS because it'll go by so fast that you won't be able to hit the key. You also have wake up event setup, so you can set up specific things to wake the system from a standby. And under boot, you have your boot mode, so you can set it to just UEFI or legacy and UEFI, and the fixed boot order, as well as under each one of these, the priority for each section for hard drive, CD-ROM drives, and the UEFI system. You'll also notice we've got some buttons here on the right side for internet, message, mail, live update, hard disk drive backup, M-Flash, and password. So in the security section you can set a password on the BIOS. These other two require applications to be installed in the system, but you'll be able to actually browse the internet without even booting into Windows if you install those applications. Under energy saving section, you can set the energy saving information, and when you set this to eco mode, those are the settings it's going to use. By clicking on the left button for overclocking settings, OC here, we get all our overclocking settings that are available to us, including the base frequency and CPU ratio, as well as some Intel Turbo Boost and Enhanced Turbo Boost functions. Some of the most important ones here is the OC Genie function control, which allows you to change it to turn OC Genie on using the BIOS button, or using the button on board the motherboard. When it's depressed, it will enable the overclocking. Under My OC Genie, you can set it to default, where it'll automatically increase the hardware to a certain percentage, or you can customize it and go into the My OC Genie options here, where you can change the various overclocking options, and then when it's depressed, it will use depressed, or if you have it set in the BIOS, it will use those settings. So I bumped my CPU ratio to 40, which should give me a 4 GHz overclock, and I'm going to turn the XMP extreme memory profile on. So when my OC Genie's on, that's what we're going to have set. You have your DRAM reference clock speeds, as well as the DRAM frequency, which you can see is auto all the way up to 3200 megahertz. And again, the XMP profile here on the front, which we have enabled in standard mode as well. Memory fast boot, as well as VDROOP and spread spectrum settings. Further down, you've got your CPU core voltage settings and your DDR voltage settings, and an OC read try count here of 1. So if the overclock doesn't work, it will revert the settings and give you a message about that. Under overclocking profiles, you have 6 profiles that you can save. You can save them to a USB drive or load them from a USB drive. You also have all your CPU specifications and the technology support information here. Memory Z, which gives you information, specific information on your memory, and CPU settings system, where you can set the active processor cores, limit the CPU ID maximum, and change a whole bunch of other settings regarding the Intel specific technologies. And here you can set power limits so that the Turbo Boost only uses a certain amount of power. You also can set your ratio limit for each core on the processor here under these settings. That's pretty much it as far as the MSI Z77A-G45 Gaming UEFI BIOS goes. Other than you got a nice little feature here where if you hit F12, you can take a screenshot of the BIOS. You do have to have a USB thumb drive plugged in so that it can save it somewhere. I hope you enjoyed this overview of the MSI BIOS. For the full review, please see www.hightechlegion.com, and don't forget to check the benchmarks out in the overview video. Please subscribe to our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and take care.